You know, for 1,000 years, while the West was still just figuring out how to build empires, one civilization, well, they'd already perfected it. So, let's be absolutely clear. This is not the story of a nation's rise.
No, it is the story of its return. All right, let's dive into part 1, the center of the world. You have to understand, for most of recorded history, China wasn't just a global power. It was the world's economic and cultural center of gravity.
Think about this. For centuries, this one empire, was producing and controlling nearly a third of all the wealth on the entire planet.
And while Europe was, this messy patchwork of warring kingdoms, China was this single unified empire, and its inventions, gunpowder, the printing press, the compass, these were things that would literally go on to shape the entire world.
All of this power, it created a really unique way of seeing the world. They called themselves the Middle Kingdom, and that wasn't just a name. It meant they saw themselves as civilization itself. So outsiders, they didn't show up to negotiate deals as equals. No, they came to pay tribute. But you know what happens with that kind of supreme confidence? You can freeze into complacency. And that's exactly what happened. Its amazing institutions became rigid and inflexible. The technology that was once so revolutionary, well, it started to get outdated. And just over the horizon, something new, a totally different kind of power, was beginning to stir. Which brings us to part 2, the poison and the gun. See, this new power that was showing up on China's shores, it wasn't looking for tribute. It was looking for control. And it was about to break the world's richest empire, not with huge armies, but with something far more insidious: addiction.
Here was the problem for the West. They were absolutely addicted to Chinese goods. Tea, silk, porcelain, you name it. But China? It was so powerful and self-sufficient, it wanted basically nothing in return. So all this silver was just flowing in one direction, out of Europe and into China. And Europe's treasuries were just bleeding dry. So Britain needed something, anything, to balance the trade. And they found it: opium. They'd grow it in British India and then smuggle it into China, creating this absolutely devastating addiction crisis that just tore through society, from the army right up to the imperial court. Let's be real, this wasn't trade, this was economic warfare. So when the emperor's officials finally had enough, and they seized all this poison and destroyed it, what was Britain's response? It wasn't diplomacy. It was war. But you have to understand, this was not a war between equals, not even close. It was more like a collision between two different centuries. You had Britain's steam-powered industrial gunboats going up against China's traditional wooden junks. Honestly, the outcome was decided before the first shot was even fired. And defeat brought something much worse than just losing a war. It brought humiliation. These things called the unequal treaties were signed, basically at gunpoint. They forced China to pry open its ports, hand over Hong Kong to Britain, and, get this, grant foreigners total immunity from Chinese laws, even on Chinese soil.
And when China tried to resist again later on, it got even worse. Foreign troops marched right into the capital. They looted and then burned the emperor's summer palace, this incredible treasure of Chinese civilization. The message couldn't have been clearer. Nothing is sacred. Not even your history, not even your culture.
And so began part 3, a nation carved apart. The dragon, once so powerful, was broken. This was the start of what China now calls the century of humiliation.
It's interesting. The foreign powers realized they didn't even need to conquer China outright. They could just carve it up, like a pie. They created these spheres of influence where they controlled all the important stuff: the ports, the railways, the resources. China was still a country on the map, sure, but in name only. And all this pressure and humiliation from the outside, it caused the nation to just explode from the inside. The Taiping Rebellion, a truly catastrophic civil war, ended up killing over 20 million people. Just to put that in perspective, that's more than all the deaths in World War I. The empire was bleeding out, and the downward spiral just kept going. A humiliating defeat by a newly modernized Japan, and then one last desperate uprising, the Boxer Rebellion, which was just brutally crushed by an international army from 8 different nations, all marching through Beijing.
But you know, the deepest wound of all wasn't the loss of land or the money. It was psychological. It was the complete shattering of a civilization's idea of itself. The Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, was now just a cautionary tale, a place to be pitied and exploited.
That brings us to part 4, forged in humiliation. Because humiliation like that, it doesn't just go away. It ferments.
it gets harder. And out of all those ashes, one single cold question starts to burn. How do we make sure this never happens to us again?
The old imperial system just collapsed under the weight of it all. It had failed. And in the decades of chaos that followed, a radical new idea started to take root: communism. And its promise wasn't just reform. No, it was a violent, total break from that weak and humiliating past.
The promise of the new Communist Party was incredibly simple, and it was absolute. An end to foreign humiliation, an end to internal weakness. The ultimate goal here wasn't freedom or equality. It was strength.
And through the decades that followed, through war, famine, and incredibly brutal political campaigns, 3 rules got carved into the national soul. First, never ever depend on outsiders. Second, never be divided internally. And third, never ever again lose control of your own destiny.
So you have to see this period not as a time of healing, but as a time of hardening. The nation became like a piece of steel being forged, beaten and folded under immense heat and pressure, learning to endure any amount of pain, because that was the price of strength.
Okay, now for our final section, the dragon's long game. Because when China finally did reopen its doors to the world, you have to understand, it wasn't coming with its hand out asking for help. It was coming with a plan to execute.
The new battlefield wasn't going to be fought with guns, not at first. It was the global economy, and the strategy was brilliantly simple. Learn everything you can from the world, outwork everyone in the world, and outlast everyone in the world. This time, production was the weapon.
And that's the key. Beneath every shiny new skyscraper, every incredible high-speed train, every single technological leap forward, was the raw, burning memory of those foreign gunboats and the ashes of the burned palaces.
And of course, once you have that economic power, military modernization follows. The goal here was simple, it was absolute, and it was non-negotiable. Never be outgunned again.
So, by the time we get to the 21st century, China wasn't showing up asking for a seat at the global table. No, it was busy building its own.
And this is a really crucial point. What the rest of the world often looks at and calls ambition, China sees as insurance. It's a guarantee in their eyes that history will never, ever be allowed to repeat itself. And that history, that trauma, is exactly why China plays the long game. They're not thinking in 4-year election cycles, they're planning in decades. Because a dragon does not need to rush, it only needs to remember.
So when you trace this entire story, this incredibly long, painful, and powerful journey, you're left with one final question. What is the single most potent fuel for a nation's return to power?
Memory.